This video is brought to you by Shop Controller. Shop Controller handles all aspects of running an auto shop from appointment to invoice.
Manage jobs with custom workflows, statuses, and categories. It can help you get paid faster and gain access to accurate labor times.
Hundreds of shops use Shop Controller. Check them out in the link below.
Today we are driving the coolest Toyota truck you probably have never heard of, and you are definitely going to want. Meet the Toyota Mega Cruiser. So, starting this thing, Kurt, pretty straightforward?
Super straightforward. It does have glows. It's got like a glow screen in there, but it's warm. We just moved it, and it's a nice day here in Salt Lake, so fire it up.
Key on.
Yep.
So immediately, and this is a big difference, like I spent some time in ex-military Humvees. I mean, you start them up, the whole thing is like, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it is a agricultural experience. This is a lot quieter.
The 15B variant, this motor package that's in here, the BFT, very smooth running diesel. So not a crazy high output, but a very nice running. In fact, these are becoming popular swaps into older Land Cruisers because it is a short 4-cylinder, easy to swap into things as far as bolt to different trannies and T-cases, but also just how smooth it runs. And I think you'll feel for a 4.1 liter, it moves this big vehicle around just fine, up to about 55, 60 miles an hour.
So Kurt, have you taken this thing off-road? Like, how does it do out on a trail?
It does great. I have a little bit. I don't spend a ton of time driving it off-road because a lot of our Utah trails, particularly mountain stuff, they're steep, right? Or they're narrow. So narrow trails on this, not super friendly. But out in the desert, it does great. It's not my go-to because it's unique. It's also not that fast to get to places, so it kind of gets more used around the shop here as a parts runner. Not uncommon for us to put pallets in the back, and it needs some love. Looks like it needs a wiper blade, and as with all collections, when you own a few, they always need something.
Right. Wow, it's so smooth.
Yeah, but jam the pedal and she'll get up and go.
Okay, full throttle. Turbo spools.
It's not bad.
Heck yeah!
That's not bad for a big machine.
So compared to like the NA 6.2 Humvees, this is like a downright Supra. I mean, that's seriously quick. No, I mean, what's amazing about this, and granted we're on pretty smooth asphalt, is it doesn't beat you up as much as I initially thought it might.
Yeah, they're quite compliant suspension, and that's part of that. They are lighter duty. So to be fair, if you had tried to load this up the way a fully up-armored Humvee could be for downrange use, this thing's going to struggle under that kind of weight. But with 10 bodies and kit in here, 10 soldiers and all their gear, these things ride even better. They get really compliant with some weight in them. So to me, it's even a little stiff when unloaded.
Do people know what it is? Like, do people come up to you and ask what it is? Do some people know?
Most think it's a Humvee. You know, I've had a ton of people say it's a Humvee, but yeah, absolutely. Occasionally someone looks at it and says, man, that's quite different. You know, like, you got to tell me about that thing. So some know that it's something different.
Gotcha. So Kurt, we've actually talked a little bit about Mega Cruisers in the past, and these have really blown up online recently.
They have.
A lot of people have kind of figured them out, but let's just do top level recap. What is a Mega Cruiser?
Yeah, so the Mega Cruiser started its life as the Japanese Self-Defense Force mobility vehicle. So built in Japan, built by Toyota for the Japanese military. Also used by some police, some ambulance service, some other limited uses. But overall, it was a military vehicle built for the Japanese government.
Okay.
Now, it's pretty easy to look at them and say, it's kind of looking familiar, kind of recognize these a little bit, right? And we hear a lot that it does look like a Humvee, which is used by the US military. No secret, for many, many years, we have been a partner force with the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and it's not uncommon to see a Mega Cruiser used side by side with a Humvee in battle theaters, especially in the past over the years. Big differences are going to be a 4-cylinder turbo diesel versus the big V8 diesel that the Humvee had. It is a turbo 4.1 liter, so it's kind of small, but that's a big 4-cylinder, so a very torquey diesel. 4-wheel steering, so it does have front and rear steering from the factory. Factory 37-inch tires, which is cool. A Toyota did come with factory 37s. Locking differentials front and rear, inboard brakes. It's a full-time 4-wheel drive with a locking center diff.
So it sounds like a lot of the formula was the same between the Mega Cruiser and the Humvee. So like
very similar.
Humvees were pretty famous for having portals.
Yep.
Does this have portals?
Portal axles, yep. Portal reduction hubs, front and rear. independent suspension front and rear, so very similar. I'll say that architecture of them is quite different underneath. When you get looking at the differences, these are a lighter mobility vehicle than the Humvee, so the upper and lower control arms are a different size on these. They're smaller.
Right.
You wouldn't see these as up armored as like you would see a Humvee. So still a heavy vehicle, but not quite as heavy as a fully up armored, kitted out Humvee would be.
Have you had any problems with it since you've owned it?
No, I mean, they, like every old vehicle, particularly this is a surplus, so it's one of their higher mileage units and it was a little more beat up. They definitely need some love, and this one, I have a whole laundry list of things to do to it, but right now we just kind of keep it maintained and clean and running and use it as a fun shop truck.
So, I mean, the hardest part about this is, if you've driven like a Japanese K car, the right-hand drive thing is pretty easy to get used to, because the thing's tiny.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's wild, right?
This makes it a little harder to kind of spatially get an awareness of where you are, you know?
It's very wide, it's also quite long, and if you look over your left shoulder there when safely, that back corner is a long ways away, and so think about that spatial awareness. And I always laugh about thinking of a civilian mega cruiser on Tokyo streets, like it was a status symbol to own one of those. It was by far not a practice of utility, it was because you could to own one. That's why it was such a limited number.
I mean, I think it would take some significant practice to navigate a Starbucks drive-thru in this without really running over children and babies and dogs.
Yeah, you got to be careful because of the width. I will add though, because of that four-wheel steering, they're crazy maneuverable in parking lots. Like it turns sharper than even a short wheelbase 40 series does. They have such a tight turning radius because that rear steer kicks in, and it's automatic. You don't have a way to manually control that from up front. So what it does is when you start approaching the lock of the front, it'll kick that back over. So it's quite amazing, and you can like kind of abbreviate this turn, and you'll feel that back in if you turn sharp. You'll feel it come around. You'll feel the back sweep past you. It's not a huge angle, but it's enough.
And what's funny is, like, you know, four-wheel steering has become very popular now. Like all the electric Hummer stuff has it, and it really transformed the experience, but that's all done by computers.
It is,
right?
yeah.
And it's all electric actuators, where this is all hydraulic.
Mechanical system, so like, this doesn't have a lot of ECUs underneath the dash. There's gonna be one for the engine, but other than that, there's not a whole lot going on. This is a very, very visceral manual vehicle.
So Kurt, let's take a pause from the Mega Cruiser for a sec and talk about what you guys do here, because Cruiser Outfitters is a really special place.
Well, I appreciate that. We since it kicked off in 1992, way before my time. I didn't even have a driver's license then. I started working there in college, actually, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and then I took it over in 2002, and I was a full-time college student that really just took over kind of a name. They were a full-service shop at the time. I didn't have the time or talent to be doing that. So we really moved it into like a parts model, like parts and accessories. We still do some installation and some parts fitting, but the bulk of what we do is shipping parts. And you kind of saw behind the scenes a little bit. We did a quick tour of all the parts we have. We keep about 8,500 part numbers in stock here.
Wow.
It's a lot, way too much for this building. It's overflowing.
Now, the thing about Land Cruisers is they go back like 80 years at this point. Which Land Cruisers do you guys supply parts for?
Everything we can get our hands on. So we have stuff that fits all the way back to 1958 models, and even really would fit pre-Land Cruiser in the US models, just like hardware and some of the suspension fitting parts, but then all the way up to brand new stuff. So we're already adding applications for the 250 series and the LX600, which is the Global 300 series chassis.
So if I am looking for a really hard to find part on my FJ62, is there a good chance you guys either have it or could find it?
Yeah, good chance we either have it. If it's available new anywhere in the world, there's a good chance we have it. I mean, that's kind of what we go for, is new parts and stuff that we can buy in volume to resell. There are some like boutique parts that maybe somebody out there's making, and if we don't have it, we can point people to that. And then there are some really great used cruiser marketplaces out there as well, both shops or just online places to find those, and we always point customers that way if we don't have it as well.
Kurt's being too modest. He showed me earlier he's got windshields for 70 series Land Cruisers, which were never sold here.
Yeah, we keep a lot of things, and that's been a big shot in the arm of the cruiser community in the United States, is all these JDM and out-of-market imports. Because in the United States, once they're 25 years old, you can legally import to the United States and plate them in most states. Utah's very easy to get them licensed, legal, insured. But because of that, there's all these really cool models coming over. I know you've been to the museum, so you saw a lot of them there. And we've got a few here today. One that's a really special one to get to go drive around, because there's maybe 10 or 12 of them that exist in the United States, so they're unique.
Now the crazy thing is, just like AM General, they did a military and a civilian version, right?
Correct.
So the civilian version of the Humvee is the Hummer H1, and the Toyota version, was that actually marketed as the Mega Cruiser?
It was still called a Mega Cruiser. So these technically in the military format wouldn't have had the name Mega Cruiser. There was a military nomenclature for them, and they were called a BXD-10 was their, as all things Toyota have a little code that kind of tell you a little bit about what series motor, what chassis, and which iteration. Now the civilian version was a BXD-20. And the BXD-20 was a very similar format, although they had a hardtop, a factory hardtop, all the way back rather than the soft top. They had a little different door profile, little more kind of more creature comforts, including an air conditioning, a big AC unit in the center console. The military ones never had that.
Gotcha. Now, I've done a little poking online, and there's been a couple civilian versions that have sold recently. I mean, and we're talking well into the six figures.
Yeah, they're insane what those do once they're in the US and globally. There's just not a lot of them. The numbers vary, but what we do know is that number's somewhere between 150 and 180 of the civilian ones that were ever built. So you're not only dealing with a super rare and unique vehicle, but also one that's very sought out by collectors. So you collide the two things, like very low production and very desirable, and we've seen those numbers get into the 300,000 plus range for one that was actually a left-hand drive converted vehicle, sold out of Colorado, and that one sold for over 300,000. Typically, we're seeing them more like in the 150 range, landed in the U.S., maybe like low 100s when they're sold at auction out of Japan. But that number's only going to continue to creep up because they're making their way into collectors' hands and they don't ever come back on the used market.
Now let's talk about the military one, because that's what we're next to. So how many did they make in the military config?
So there's never been published numbers. I'd love Toyota to share that. So if anyone at Toyota's watching, we'd love to know that for the museum. But what we do know is it's somewhere in the 3,000 range. And production of these isn't necessarily over. They have been rumored, we've been told by pretty decent insiders, that they'll make low batches of these for the Japan military when ordered. They're built by Hino, the chassis and the parts, so a Toyota partner company or a family company of Toyota, but somewhere in the 3,000 range. So from a numbers wise, there's a lot more of them available that are getting surplus. There's also a little less desirable to have this version versus the civilian one because of the rarity, but no air conditioning, for example. So these are a warm vehicle. Little different sound deadening, like a lot less, no carpet, little different seats in these. So just like the Humvee to H1 transition, these also were a little less creature comforts. They're great to drive, but it's not something I'd want to drive in every day.
Now, Kurt, I don't want to out you, but is it legal to import an ex-military Japanese vehicle to the U.S.?
It is, yeah. The U.S. has no prohibitions about having a Japanese military vehicle. This one's completely licensed and legal here in Utah. Came in through federal ports. Now, there is some legality about Japan selling off surplus vehicles, military vehicles. And I think that dates all the way back to World War II. They signed a treaty that Japan cannot supply military equipment to other nations, and that kind of includes perhaps selling mega cruisers. So because of that, this is technically surplus and demilitarized. So anything that is military equipment on that, they've taken a hammer to it. And I'll give an example like up front is, like some of the lights, they take a hammer or a torch to and they bust and burn them. So these would be like the lights for running your night vision, like the IR lights for running night vision, and some of the other military, the horn, some of the unit numbers that would have been the military markings are all burned off. So essentially by the time they're done, they've taken anything that differentiates it other than a little of the body style from being a military vehicle. It's now just a mega cruiser. There's nothing special about it now.
So what do you think imported and legal in the US something like this is worth?
They're selling in like the really beat up ones in the kind of high 20s, a really, really clean one, mid 40s up into the 50s if it's really clean. There are a couple configurations. There's the traditional troop carrier model. This one has seat belts for 10, and it's a factory soft top. 4 benches in the back, 2 seats in the front. And there's even some that have had a bench in the middle there, so could technically hold more. You look at how much real estate's there. There are truck variants as well that have a hard cab truck. So a couple different variants of the military ones that are coming over, but value-wise, they're nowhere near, I'm gonna call it like maybe a fifth of what the civilian ones are traditionally selling for is kind of what the military ones are doing right now.
Is this titled as a Toyota?
It is, yeah. It's titled in Utah. It's titled as this is titled exactly as what it is, which is a 1996 BXD20 Toyota Mega Cruiser.
Crazy.
Yeah, so the title reflects that and everything. It's completely imported that way.
Well, let's check out the engine.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a over 4-liter 4-cylinder.
It is. It's a 4.1 4-cylinder turbo diesel. It's a 15B family.
Oh, that's so light.
It's
So
pretty dusty and messy under here. I should have given it a little cleanup, but
it's okay. If you've ever had to do that on a Humvee, it's pretty weighty process. This is, I mean, look how thin and lightweight that is. Is that fiberglass?
Fiberglass, yep. They are a fiberglass front, a composite of some variety, fiberglass full hood, so lightweight. I mean, you'll kind of notice that about the entire chassis compared to that of like a Humvee is a lot lighter utility, a lot lighter weight. So I don't know if that was a design criteria to fly on planes or helicopters, but everything about them is a little lighter weight and, to be fair, lighter duty compared to its Humvee counterpart. But they're a mobility vehicle for troops, not necessarily. While you could see these with like different technical mounts in the back, missile launchers, things, those are quite rare compared to just set up as a human carrier.
So this engine, what else is it used in? Anything we know?
Yeah, you could also see the 15B variants in like some Dyna vans and some other Toyota industrial kind of van shuttle buses, for example. So not uncommon to see that in other platforms.
And the horsepower?
I don't know the number off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you on that
That's
one.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, what's the top speed?
These will do, I mean, it'll do 65 pretty comfortably, but really they're built for convoy. So call it between the portal reduction and the low gearing, we're talking like 55, 60 miles an hour is comfortable at speed. You can get up to 65, 75, but you're kind of wringing its neck and it just feels like you're pushing a little far. They're built for convoy. They don't have a giant fuel tank in them. They're not like they were really built for being like a lone vehicle driving on these huge giant distances themselves. They probably were always surrounded by other military vehicles, including a fuel truck.
And were these a 4-speed auto?
They are a 4-speed auto. It's the 3443, or no, so the A443. Very common transmission that's used in many other Toyota applications, so Super Bomber. And it's a very similar T-case as well as like an 80 series has, a full-time T-case. Very similar to the 80 and the 100 series, like an HF2 variant. But these ones have a park brake built onto the back. So there's a drum-mounted park brake, which is interesting because Land Cruisers did that on all, like many early Land Cruisers up into the 80s had the T-case mounted park brake, and then we see it back on the Mega Cruiser.
So, is there any shared components between a Mega Cruiser and like a civilian Toyota that we'd know?
Yeah,
here
you
in the
bet.
States?
I mean, if you're a savvy to Land Cruisers, you'll notice like the shifter is very 80 series-esque, like not much difference. Steering wheel off of an early 80 series. Locker switch button, that's right out of every locked 80 series or dual locked 70 series as well, so very common. Switches start getting a little different, other components, but underneath you do recognize quite a few shared parts, even though it's very different architecture, the IFS, IRS, the portals, etc.
Are these dual locked from the factory?
They are. They're, so yeah, front and rear lockers electric,
Nice.
manually selectable, and then the T-case, it does have a center diff in the T-case as well because it is full-time four-wheel drive.
Very cool. Very cool. And you were mentioning that they were all produced in right-hand drive.
Yes, never were made as left-hand drive variants, so anything you see left-hand, which we're starting to see more and more of them pop up, they're all conversions. Some are done really cleanly with the dash moved, everything done really tidily. Others a little less so, but that's just because end users were buying those up. They're very popular. You see quite a few of them in the Philippines. A lot of them got imported there. A lot of them make their way throughout Europe. And when I say a lot of them, we're talking like a dozen of them, which to me is a lot given the such low numbers of them out there.
Yeah.
But left-hand drive, not a lot.
Let's hop around back. So, Kurt, obviously you mentioned that enthusiasts call these Mega Cruisers. Would you consider this within the Land Cruiser family, or is it so different that it's...
It's so different, and I'm kind of a purist, not in a bad way or a gatekeeping way or dismissive way, but in my opinion, everything that's a Land Cruiser from Toyota says Land Cruiser on it. Like, they get to ultimately decide what name they put that. So I celebrate all the other vehicles for exactly what they are. So that doesn't make this any less in my mind. In fact, it's really cool. It's mega. It's better. It's bigger. It's a mega cruiser. We do have them at the museum. Greg, the founder of the museum, just like thought that, hey, they're a cool part of the story. There's some shared architecture, but it's also just a really neat cruiser. But it does not have a J in the model code, so to us that tells us it's not a Land Cruiser chassis. It's different. So,
Do you know what the payload is and what they tow?
I don't off the top of my head. I used to know a lot of those numbers. I'll have to dig it up. But they're kind of widely published on the civilian side, less so on the military side, because there just hasn't been a lot of published data. Like, we can't even get parts diagrams for this version. That was all like very proprietary, and since they were really only used by the Japanese military, very few made it into other military environments. A few did, but primarily Japanese, you just don't see any documentation on them.
So Kurt, we're outside of Salt Lake here, and you run Cruiser Outfitters. You guys specialize in Land Cruiser parts. Can you get parts for a Mega Cruiser?
We can, and we actually stock some here in an odd way. We keep like some of the consumables, a lot of shared stuff on the motor, because the B Series diesel is used in a wide variety of Land Cruisers. So a lot of parts on that are shared with older Land Cruiser variants. Things like oil filters, fuel filters, all have that. Things that are proprietary to this, we've started stocking. Things like tie rod ends and brake pads, just items that those few Mega Cruiser owners out there, myself included, may need down the road, so we kind of keep a few of them around.
And walk me through the four-wheel steering. So I know one of the things, especially the early Humvees, were known for is they were very much completely mechanical, like mechanical injection diesels, very few electronics at all. Is that the same with the Mega Cruiser? Like, is this a hydraulic rear steer?
It is hydraulic. It is very, everything about these is really easy to work on because there's not a whole lot of electronics. It's very simple systems, right down to the four-wheel drive actuation and the center diff, the actuators on the lockers, all the same stuff we've seen in the Land Cruiser realm since like the early 1990s, which jives because this is a mid-90s vehicle, but nothing changed on these. It's all the exact same, so very easy to work on. If the lockers had an actuator failure, which is rare, it's easy to remove that actuator in the field and manually lock that into place with 4 12-millimeter bolts, and you could lock the locker, all kinds of things on that. They're very field serviceable and easy to work on.
Well, let's pop the back if you don't mind. Let's see what it looks like. So just basically you've got enormous flat load space, and then I assume the canvas top comes off, right?
They do, yeah. The fully removable canvas top, or it unrolls in different panels. You can roll up some of the sides. You can take just the sides off.
Nice.
You can do quite a few things to kind of, functionality of that.
Are these 24 volts?
They're 24-volt systems, 4 24-volt system, which many JDM Land Cruisers are as well. So that wasn't too abnormal for us to get. It's a little goofy when you start wanting accessories, things like a head unit for a stereo. There's a few out there. They're usually made for like tractors and agriculture equipment. But there's some options out there.
So Kurt, thank you so much for letting me give a cruise in your Mega Cruiser. I am blown away. And I know this is counterintuitive, but you look at it and you think it's going to be an absolute garden tractor to drive, but the refinement is kind of here. It's a lot better than I think a lot of folks would expect. And just like every other Toyota product, other than a bit of a rattle.
The hood latch up there needs a little tightening.
It's amazing that 90,000 kilometers of hard service use, and it's tight as a drum.
Yeah.
Like the brakes, the engines, it all feels like you'd expect a Toyota to feel, which is really cool.
Not too hard to drive, is it? It's pretty amazing, a big machine, and not that bad to navigate around in.